I think what it also probably did is it made me feel much more like he's still alive in me, or that I'm just an
Mm.
extension of him. And it's really easy once you start to look at life as nonlinear and always just being the moment, right? Any moment is the moment, right? And we can call it singularity, we can call it oneness, or whatever we want to ascribe to it semantically. But if all there is the moment, then I kind of feel like I am my dad, and like, he is still here. And then it's just funny because he would have never wanted anything material, and I'm on my way, hopefully to have a net worth that's pretty ridiculous. And so, right, he would have opposed that to all ends, but maybe not, because maybe I'm just him.
We think of life and death as like a break, but it's really more of a kind of a change or a shift, or especially when you think of it as patterns in the way that your father and mother had these patterns, which were their body and their ways of being in the world. And you, of course, have that in a sense in your body, but also being around them and with them.
Yeah, so I'm very much a futurist, a technologist, and I'm probably off the spectrum as far as how I view things through that perspective right now. So one of my partners believes that the singularity has already happened, and I don't dispute that. But one of the companies that I'm a partner in, we've built a product where people upload lots of videos of themselves, and it's a legacy product. And at a certain amount of videos, or a certain amount of minutes of recorded videos of people just telling their story and their philosophies and answering questions, we can create an avatar of them that now knows how they think, how they feel, how they sound. And we can have people engage with those as though they're the real person. So if I had this avatar of myself and passed away, people could still talk to something that looked and sounded just like me. And so I look at things like AI that can accurately reconstruct the past. And I look at AIs that can do things like very accurately predict the future. And then I say, so, okay, if we can have digital representations of ourselves that think like us, sound like us, that can have a past reconstructed or a future reconstructed, now we start to think, well, then maybe time doesn't become the constraint anymore. The only thing that I have that I think is consequential is the following. We all should love more. And I said that message is only to myself. But if it resonates with you hearing it as an extension of me, or me as you, love more as well, because the world can always use more love in it. And we can love our customers more, and our enemies and our neighbors and our families and ourselves, right? That's a big one. I can't love my dogs any more than I do, because I love them fully 100%. If we were able to all just tune into the love, not the hate, if we were all able to bring that vibration, frequency, whatever we want to call it, perspective into reality, right? En masse, then I think that there's probably a massive blessing for reality and creation.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Love and Philosophy Beyond Dichotomy. In this episode, I'm talking with Cory Warfield. I wanted to talk to Cory because he's lived on every side of traditional dichotomies, at least it seems to me, from living on the streets to being written $1 million check on a private plane to being one of the people who help others the most in terms of finding a path that works for them in life. As a kid, he dreamed of being a prince or having a Rolls Royce, and today he still dreams of that sometimes, and he's much closer to it. But he also thinks it's silly at times. He's very honest about these seeming contradictions, how close he's been, how far he's fallen, how much others have helped him. He's got a really big heart and dreams really big. We talk about AI here. We talk about his own life. We talk about him finding his dad's memoirs and realizing how much more similar he was to his father, including his dad's run-in with the law, than he'd ever realized, and these kind of patterns that seem to recur in our lives and also in our families. And what does it take to get out of these patterns? I've been wondering about this a bit in my own life lately. Certain patterns that seem to stay with you, and then somehow you just break free of them, and it's as if you were never that at all. And we talk about transcending embodiment, which I don't think we will transcend embodiment. I think embodiment is the thing to accept. Cory is a really radical futurist, but actually when we get into this, we find that we're very similar in a way, because as I see it, this embodiment versus uploading yourself into a computer idea is still part of this either or paradigm that in my own philosophy I'm sort of working to see differently. I talk about holding the paradox, or I talk about navigability and all these things. But in any case, I'm wide open to listening and learning about it because it's fascinating and there's so much that does resonate. And Corey has some really interesting ideas, and he's also started a lot of companies, successful companies. He's working in AI. He has this great AI newsletter. He has 500,000 followers on LinkedIn. We talk about all of this and getting to these different ways of being present, which is kind of the word we come back to, presence and love, and why those are the core of all of this. But of course, we also talk about things like blockchain and why Corey believes blockchain is crucial to developing AI at the moment. He also tells me about this video called The Egg. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. I just watched it, and actually it did tear me up a little, even though I didn't think it would because he had told me about it. But in any case, there's a lot of stuff in here. It gets really rich by the end, and I'm thankful to Corey, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks for being here. I'm so glad you are, and I hope you're doing well out there wherever you're making your way. Hey, Corey. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's really great to meet you. I'm so interested in all the ways you've made in your life. I hardly know where to begin. There's so many different worlds that we all live in these days, and in quite a few worlds, like LinkedIn world or the AI world, or there's other worlds. Many people know you, but could you just give me like a little short intro of what you'd like for people to know up front, maybe?
Well, sure. And that's not a daunting task at all. And it's interesting. I think about numbers, and, I think a lot of people, have misconceptions about others. So people can see I have a large following on channels on social media and think, oh, everyone's heard of you. Okay. 500,000 people have followed me on LinkedIn out of 8 billion, right? Statistically, 95% of the world or more that still doesn't know who I am. So happy to give a breakdown. I'm a bit anomalous. I grew up in Evanston outside of Chicago and learned how to wait tables and bartend at 16 years old at the Kellogg Business School at Northwestern. And kind of weird how that happened. My mom was an administrator. They didn't pay for alcohol. So at 16 with the work license, I was able to mix cocktails and serve drinks. And I did a little bit in the pharmaceutical world, the computer software world, briefly in the late 90s, but then I went back into restaurants for almost 20 years. And so I'm a career waiter and bartender at heart, and I can't turn it off. Hospitality really got ingrained in me. But about 8 years ago, I guess now, I caught the entrepreneurial bug and I couldn't stand the instability in scheduling in restaurants. So with no knowledge, no expertise, I started a software company leveraging machine learning and deep machine learning, the kind of, some of that's turned into AI over the years. But somehow we bootstrapped and we got to market and we got customers and raised a bunch of money. So I learned how to do all of that, right? And be a tech entrepreneur. And so I've gone on to mentor a lot of companies, started a few as well. I was a frontman of a band that toured locally, way back when as well. And music's definitely my huge passion. But yeah, so we've got the newsletter, got my social channel. We're going to launch an academy through interesting engineering in a few weeks. So that's been a priority. And I have my own launch pad. So I've got 15 Web3 companies that I'm incubating. But then I'm also an entrepreneur in residence at the Founder Institute, where we've got, I think our cohort's at 10 companies right now. So got about 25 startups that aren't mine that I'm helping build and scale while, I'm building and scaling my few as well.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to get a grasp of this. I mean, one thing, this channel is beyond dichotomy, so it's about like trying to get past these kind of traditional categories. I think you definitely do that. You've lived your life in beyond those categories, I would say, in a way. Maybe not on purpose, maybe so. I don't know. You can tell me, but it's hard to get a grasp on. You've started how many companies? Like, I mean, do you even know anymore? And yeah, is it 15 now or more?
Well, if we count the failures, the ones that never sold items,
Those are important, right? And failures are important.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say, right now, WeJ's is my kind of priority, and then decarbon is my launch pad. Those are kind of my official companies right now. I'm in leadership and ownership of a few others at the moment that are doing some things. I'd say probably realistically 10 companies, including the failures. So a lot, but not not quite as comical as
And
people
that
might assume.
and that didn't start until you'd already worked in the restaurant business for a while, right? Because I think you had this whole path. Um, you were born in Chicago, is that right? And then you ended up in Colorado working in the restaurant business, is that right? And there
Well,
wasn't there some time in there that was like a little bit unstable. I mean, I feel like you've really lived on a lot of different sides of life. Is that right? Or
yeah. So that, and you've done your homework, which I love. Yeah, I was born on the West Coast, but came to Chicago area at 2 years old. So grew up in the Midwest. But after my little time as a metrologist at a pharmaceutical company and software tester at Rand McNally, I thought I was going to be a famous rapper, and so I did kind of a national tour without much set up for myself, and all the things that you would think of as someone trying to be a rapper. And so you know when that didn't fully work out, I ended up on the streets for a couple of years. So yeah, there were times I was living in parks and off handouts and eating out of garbages and in and out of jails. And so, yeah,
oh
thank
yeah,
God it's been over 20 years since then. But yeah, that ended me up living in a garage in a small mountain town in Colorado, washing dishes at a restaurant. And I did great. So I became a busboy, then waiter, then a bartender. And that kind of set me off on that 15 years, 15-ish years of kind of fine dining.
yeah. I think people who look at your profile now and you've started all these companies, you have 500,000 followers and different media outlets and stuff. It might be hard to imagine that other life, but actually, there's a connection there, I guess. Like when you think about you at that time, were you just like thinking, "This is my dream, and I'm going to go for it"? Because I feel like looking at your work and stuff, you have a kind of agility and also a way of tapping into a source of energy. I'm not sure what it is, but I wonder if that was something you had to learn how to rein in a bit, or if it's just that you've been kind of going for it since you jumped into the van and decided you were going to be a famous rapper and went down that road.
I think, even when I was living on the streets, I still had this sense of community. I know I was the guy where I'd save up money all day to buy a big pizza so I could give slices to the other people that were also living on the streets. And, we started little syndicates where we can make some monies, probably in ways that at the time, weren't fully legal. But so I kind of always had that, that entrepreneurial mindset to a degree, and that community building mindset. And even with hospitality, I mean, I just got really fortunate to be in that terrible situation because it meant I wanted to go work 20 hours a day because they had heat and free food. I was at that time getting beat up a lot as well.
Oh
Totally my
gosh.
fault, but I needed a little sense feed into me evidently. And so, I really do look at all of those as my formative years. And all these years later at 45, I've really had a great life that I've been able to enjoy. But I do talk to people that are, kind of earlier in their journeys and, and not, maybe doing quite as well. And, I'd like to think that sometimes they're inspired that maybe that's not their final chapter either. Cause it's really easy to get in that mindset of, life sucks. It'll never be worth it. For some reason, whether I'm just an optimist or whether I'm a lunatic, I never thought that was a final stop. I always knew that I had at least something a little better to look forward to.
Yes, I think that's kind of what I'm trying to push at too a little bit is these categories. I mean, maybe you were even happy in those years when you were trying to be a rapper and living in all these strange places, but we have this idea that like we're supposed to pursue something and then become famous and rich or something at it, and then okay, like we've succeeded. But I mean, in some way, I was thinking as you were talking, it's very hopeful that you made such a successful career, and by that I really mean that you're helping a lot of people because that's how I heard about you, that you were helping people. Um, uh, that you're able to do that now and juggle all these things, which I'm sure is still challenging in a way, but in another way, that makes it sound like, oh, you went through all these years of hard work so you could make it. But in a way, you were already making it back then too, right? Because all those years, I'm not sure how many exactly years you were in the restaurant business. I'm sure you were learning a lot of skills that weirdly have become skills that are actually very essential now that AI can't really do in terms of service and community and stuff like that. That's kind of a lot, but does that make you think of anything?
Well, it's interesting because during the journey, I came up with the restaurant concept that I was written, and this was only years after being on the streets, but I was written a check for $1 million on a private plane to open my own restaurant. Decided I didn't want to do that. So it's like life kept trying to seed me with these opportunities. And I finally, when it was the right time, I went on, my own rather than, trying to ride on someone else's, you know, faith in me. I've
Someone
always been
tried
an
to give you $1 million on a plane? Is that what you just said? To start a restaurant?
yeah.
Yeah. And you said
Yeah.
no.
Well, I said yes. So interesting story. They were regulars of mine at a steakhouse, and they had a concept. I wanted to call it Neighbors Bar and Grill, and I was going to do hamburgers, which were variations on hamburgers. I was going to have the only hamburger in the world because it was made out of ham. Right? I think it's very funny that a beef burger is called ham, and right, so this is going to be a ground pork product, and bound with pineapple juice, pineapple ring, half a baby Swiss wheel on top. But so I had all these different lamb burgers and ostrich burgers at a time when people weren't really doing that kind of stuff, buffalo burger. And then I had a whole concept called edibles, where everything would come in an edible bowl, right? French onion soup cooked in an onion, chili served in a cornbread bowl. And my regulars really loved the idea. And so they decided that they wanted to fund it. And, long story behind them and who they were as well. But so yeah, they flew me to Vegas. First time I went to Vegas was on a private jet with them. And, every part of that was just a story. And, even the airport that we flew out of and all these things. But so on the plane, they said, Corey, we would like to invest in your restaurant. And they gave me a check for $1 million. And this is almost 15 years ago. So this is, you know, just some years after some really hard times. So I had the check and I was really excited. And they wrote it out to Cory Warfield, right? So written in my name, and it would have cashed for sure. And so we were drinking moonshine up at the altitude.
Oh, well.
And right. And I got this feeling where I started to look at these guys, and they were not my peers. We had developed a friendship, but I was absolutely their servant, right? Servant in the castle. I was their waiter. And I realized that I didn't want to be indebted to them, and I didn't want to owe them $1 million. But then even more of an epiphany is I started to rerun all the numbers that I put together in my prospectus. And the one thing I hadn't really accounted for was myself, right? I wasn't going to be in management necessarily. I was going to be an owner. Distributions were going to go back to them. Operating costs in the first few years of a restaurant are very, very slim margins. And so I realized I wasn't going to be making any money. I was going to owe my friends $1 million and probably be working at 100 hours a week. And I just didn't want to do that. And I said it out loud. And
On the
was two guys
plane
that had
while
written a
drinking
check.
moonshine. Sorry, I think we're on a
Correct.
time lag, but on the plane still, you were thinking about all
Yeah.
this, drinking the moonshine, and you just
Yeah.
said that.
Yeah. And I said it out loud. And one of the two guys said, well, if you don't want to do it, then you probably shouldn't. I said, oh, that's a great idea. And I ripped the check up. I ripped it in half.
Wow.
But yeah, so but it feels like I was being pushed in that direction. And I'd been certified as a sommelier. So maybe a year or two after that, I tried my first startup in the wine world. It did not work. No clue what I was doing. But yeah, I feel like with a lot of people, I think having $1 million in my hand for a minute that was intended to seed a business idea kind of did, proverbially turn into the bite. Right. I got bit. I got the bug. That made me want to get into entrepreneurship. So I tried a few things, and ultimately the software company was the one that worked out.
Kind of showed you it was possible, but I guess we should say, I think I remember correctly, you were in sort of something like a ski resort in Colorado, right? With a lot of rich, famous, probably a lot of musicians and people like you had thought you were going to become, maybe, that you were hanging around with, but as you said, you were waiting on them, I guess. Or do I imagine that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So you saw this, you were very close to this world that a lot of people want to be part of. Did that change the way you saw that world, or did it make you, I mean, you said it gave you the bug, but was the bug to be part of that world, or what do you think was motivating you back then?
I've always had this concept that I would live in opulence, and I grew up kind of lower middle class, but my grandparents had done well. My grandfather had done well. And so, yeah, every month or so we'd go to their place in Winnetka, and not a huge place, but very, very lavish. And, I'd sit in there, and I would just dream that I myself would have, certain things that I ascribed to success. So for me, my grandfather drove a nice Buick that I loved, but I wanted a Rolls Royce. And my grandfather wore a nice watch, but it wasn't a Rolex. And so I always wanted a Rolex. And at one point in my life, I almost got myself a Rolex, but it was used. And I realized, no, that's not how the story plays out. Um, but so I always thought I would live in a castle and have a Rolex and drive a Rolls Royce. And then I found out that my great aunt had married the crown king of England, who abdicated the throne to marry her. And so, then I'm like, I'm royalty, right? Although,
Wow.
I didn't quite do all of that. I'm not, but they did become the Duke and Duchess of Windsor for some time. And so I think knowing that story and just having these clear visions as a kid of like me pulling up to my castle in a Rolls Royce and wanting to do better than my grandfather, financially really did plant some type of a something in me. And, at 45, I still see that vision at some points. And, at other times I think it's silly and I don't mind, and just kind of living a normal life. But and we're talking about like 7 years old that I was like deciding that I would have these things and in this opulent life. So I think becoming a servant in the castle for so many years, rather than like the Lord of the land, really, it was humbling, but at the same time, I've never really shaken that feeling of like, that might be me, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you have any idea where it came from though? Like, did your parents have that kind of desire to be?
No, they,
Mm.
they were happily broke hippies and they really
Oh.
resisted the fact that I ever wanted anything, and even in high school, I was, selling marijuana and things. And so I ended up getting myself a fairly nice car and they thought that was ridiculous. Right. So, yeah, it definitely didn't come from there.
So you sounds like, I mean, you've said a few times you kind of were on both sides of what people say is like legal or okay, or I mean back then it's already changed a lot now, but um have you like do you not see things in a really stark way of contrast? I mean, it sounds like if your parents were hippies, maybe that was a different kind of way of thinking about life too. That's not traditional, I guess, is what I'm saying. Have you ever thought about that? That you see life in a way that maybe other people don't?
Yeah, and I think everyone has their own perspectives and perspectives change, but absolutely. And it's at 45, it is what it is. But I've outlived both my parents. So I lost my father just over a year ago,
I'm sorry.
and thank him, it's part of life, right? Well, I'll be so lucky someday. But so he had been part of a memoir club, and so he had been writing memoirs, and so it was phenomenal. And so we got to reading these memoirs, and my father had a kind of challenging adulthood as well. He was a teacher, a high school teacher in Chicagoland, and he was Illinois' teacher of the year. And then he was accused of some terrible things. I think he didn't do anything, went to prison for a long time. And then he came out and he ruined his life. And right, my parents are no longer together. But I grew up with my dad, and all his students thought he was super cool. And I liked him, although, I tried to man up and, be a tougher guy than he was because he was very soft. Um, but right, I say that to say these memoirs, my father lived the same life as me. Like he was on the streets in his late teens and early 20s, and he was, dating the same kind of crazy women. And I mean, just so much of my adulthood, my early adulthood, my father had been through as well. And then he turned into this, until he got in trouble, this very respected, man of the community and things. And so I think seeing that people can change and seeing that my father and I had such a similar, adulthood. And he probably didn't realize that I had such similar as well. Cause, some of those things are not the type of things you speak to about your parents. Well, like he was even, selling drugs, living on the streets, like at the same age as I was, late
Oh, wow.
teens. And so, things sometimes do seem cyclical, but I do, it was just an eye opener reading these memoirs and realizing like, wait a minute, I thought I lived this unique life, but maybe it's just cyclical. And I'm quite certain my grandfather didn't live a life like that. But then, you start to wonder, what things are repetitive and generational. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of the formative, stuff, the foundational stuff, came from my father, unwittingly, and my mom as well. I think they both kind of shared that carefree mentality that's probably been pervasive in my life.
So you didn't know any of that about your dad till after he passed and you read the memoirs?
Correct.
Well, that must have been really strange to read that and recognize your own patterns in there.
Yeah.
I guess that's part of like growing up, and also when you lose your parents and you become you're not the kid anymore, or I mean sometimes it happens before our parents pass away where we change into feeling more like a parent. It's a strange moment. Did it change your way you saw yourself? I guess you just described it. It made you see that maybe things were a little there are more patterns than you had expected or something.
Yeah, well, I think what it also probably did is it made me feel much more like he's still alive in me, or that I'm just an
Mm.
extension of him. And it's really easy once you start to look at life as nonlinear and always just being the moment, right? Any moment is the moment, right? And we can call it singularity, we can call it oneness, or whatever we want to ascribe to it semantically. But if all there is the moment, then I kind of feel like I am my dad, and like he is still here. And then it's just funny because he would have never wanted anything material, and I'm on my way, hopefully to have a net worth that's pretty ridiculous. And right, he would have opposed that to all ends. But maybe not, because maybe I'm just him. And maybe this is, it's just the younger version of him. I don't know it inherently, but the energy of it, yeah, was really cool and liberating.
Yeah, I really see what you mean, because it is like I was talking about trying to get out of these categories. You do start to see that there's a continuity. I said I'm interested in the ways you make, and I don't think there's ever really a break. I mean, we think of life and death as like a break, but it's really more of a kind of a change or a shift, or especially when you think of it as patterns in the way that your father and mother had these patterns, which were their body and their ways of being in the world. And you, of course, have that in a sense in your body, but also being around them and with them. And they're still there. It makes me actually think of something. I was listening to one of your podcast interviews, I think on Inside Out, which I like a lot. And I think you were talking about, or you just mentioned it very briefly, that at some point maybe we'll be able to, because you're working with AI a lot now, maybe we'll be able to kind of re experience these people we've lost because we can sort of gather together all these bits that they've left, your father's memoirs, his voice, his photos, and so on, and almost have like an AR, VR, or some other R or V experience of them again. And I had been thinking about my grandmother a lot and kind of missing her and wanting to talk to her about things. And yeah, I guess all this is just to say that it already kind of happens, though, doesn't it? I mean, we almost don't need virtual worlds to do that. I mean, it's kind of already happening, but just to kind of go into this other part of your life too, do you ever think about technology as connected to that way of what you were describing, the sharing of patterning and the continuity
Well,
of
so
life? And
yeah, so I'm very much a futurist, a technologist, and I'm probably off the spectrum as far as how I view things through that perspective right now. So one of my partners believes that the singularity has already happened, and I don't dispute that. But one of the companies that I'm a partner in, we built a product where people upload lots of videos of themselves, and it's a legacy product. And at a certain amount of videos, or a certain amount of minutes of recorded videos of people just telling their story and their philosophies and answering questions, we can create an avatar of them that now knows how they think, how they feel, how they sound. And we can have people engage with those as though they're the real person. So if I had this avatar of myself and passed away, people could still talk to something that looked and sounded just like me. However, we're starting to see quantum computing, and we're seeing new types of chips, no longer the GPUs but the LPUs that can process AI 1,000 times as fast. And I believe that we do already have the capacity for artificial general intelligence, which is said to be able to have an IQ of 10,000 compared to humans 100 and something IQs. And so I look at things like AI that can accurately reconstruct the past, and I look at AIs that can do things like very accurately predict the future. And then I say, so, okay, if we can have digital representations of ourselves that think like us, sound like us, that can have a past reconstructed or a future reconstructed, now we start to think, well, then maybe time doesn't become a constraint anymore. And maybe a third dimension no longer becomes a constraint anymore. And if I can vicariously have a very, very, very realistic simulation of myself doing things like jumping out of planes and, traversing Mars, or 3D printing a space elevator to the moon, or right, and experience those as myself and my soul, whatever that might mean, wherever that might be housed, then we're no longer these three-dimensional human beings, meat bodies, all these things. And so I believe that this is all very possible. And I believe that I may be able to experience hanging out with my mom and dad and grandparents again at some point, maybe sooner than later. Or, some of the people that are, you know, even maybe further on the spectrum, we're talking about doing things like unaliving themselves and uploading their consciousness into the cloud, and then having their bodies, effectively, the human bodies done away with so that their existence is in the cloud. And they believe that that's effectively becoming immortal. I've also been studying the large world model instead of large language models, which people are believing could be the base reality behind a simulated reality theory, which I've subscribed to for a very long time. So I think we're about to see so many constraints of the human existence completely melt away. And I believe that we're probably less than 2 years away from most human beings no longer needing to work. And that's not to say people can't earn money. That's not to say people can't work and do things and build bridges and mine the earth and, you know, probably go spend time on other planets if they want to. But I think that's all pretty much right now. And I've been saying that for years and ridicules the burden of genius, and that's fine. And now I think some people are starting, and yeah, I've not been the only voice of the wilderness, but I think a lot of more people are starting to say, wait a minute, this is feasible. And I look at advancements in the health world, like nanobots that can find and cure cancers in humans, and exoskeletons that can make paraplegics walk, and, wearables or insertables that turn us into supercomputers. And I say, okay, there's a very good chance that the human life expectancy will probably get closer to 1,000 years or beyond than 100 years very soon. And so when we start to add all of this up, it really just feels like a transformative time for the human experience. And I'm of the mindset that you and I are the same person, and everyone that might be watching this is the same person. And this is all iterations. And, when you study quantum physics and mechanics and these things, you may be aware of the observer effect, but I believe we are the observer. And I believe the observer is the creator. And I believe it's incumbent upon us to bring as much positivity, which to me manifests as love, but to the world always. And so I think a lot of that can be found in teachings of all the prophets, right? I think don't judge anybody, including ourselves, right? I think that can be some of the most dangerous and hostile judgment is self-judgment, or the concern or care of what others might think of us. But when you realize everyone's ourself, then when people are judging us, we're judging ourselves, and then we love them instead of hate them for it. And then they love us a bit more because, right. And it becomes this unfolding. So I'm just very excited. I think at this point, all I really ever try to do is live in the moment and make the moment as awesome as possible.
I think that's what we could all, if we all try to do that, we'll be in a good place. But wow, there's so much in what you just said. I don't even know which thread to pick up first, but um I'm also very excited. But I think if it's okay, I kind of disagree a little bit, and maybe that's a good place to start in terms of I mean, I think we can, like, I guess, like the LLMs. You'll have to tell me about the LWM. I'm not sure I know about that. It's like spatial web maybe, but we'll go to that. But first, like, just with the large language models or the chat GPT and all of this kind of what's possible now with AI is really, really amazing. And was listening to an interview with you from years ago, and I thought it was from, like, yesterday or something, because you were saying what now people are already saying. So I just want to put that out there. But for me, and I wonder what you think, for me, the body is a really important thing. I agree, like what you were saying about, I think when we look back to the oldest religions, like they all have this idea that we're all one, and but we're all trying to realize we're one at the same time. So there's all these different perspectives, which are from some zoomed out level, one process, of course. But there's something about trying to realize that we've been trying to do over and over in all these ways. And I do think our technology is a way we try to do that. And I kind of hear that's what you're saying. But it's hard for me to imagine that we get out of the body. Like, if anything, I would think we could learn how to inhabit other bodies in a way, like other positions, so that I could better understand, for example, what your life has been like, or you could better understand what your father's life, or I could maybe go into my grandmother's life in a way, which doesn't mean I'm literally going into her body, but that we could simulate it enough that I would get a really, really widened understanding, and that this, in a way, would be expanding what the body is. But it's hard for me to imagine that I would just upload stuff into a computer and then not need a body. So, I mean, for me, the body could change a lot, but I feel like it's very important, even if it's going to change forms, or we're going to not think of ourselves as just this body. I don't know. What do you think about that, just to start?
No, I'm completely with you. I don't have any aspirations to unalive myself. I think the person that's famously in the process of that right now is Sam Altman of OpenAI. And, his former partner, Elon Musk, has said similar things before. And, about that, I think that the body is very important, but I'll bring it back to the fact that I think all we ever have is this moment. And I think, if we say humanity needs to wake up, well, if we're all one, then that just means I need to wake up. Or if I say we need more peace, or we need people to be more loving and non-judgmental, what that means if we're all one is that I need to be more loving and less judgmental. And, I think at this point I've done probably 300 or so podcasts, mostly others, and, a couple of my own when I'm not lazy. And when I'm on other people's podcasts, I think for the last maybe 150 or so, everyone always asks, it's like the Jerry Springer show. They're like, do you have any final thoughts or do you have any last words of wisdom? And right.
Yeah.
And all I say anymore is it's become a broken record. And it sounds like you listen to some of my shows, so maybe you've heard me say this, but I always just end podcasts with the following. I say, the only thing that I have that I think is consequential is the following. We all should love more. And I said that message is only to myself. But if it resonates with you hearing it as an extension of me or me as you, love more as well, because the world can always use more love in it. And, we can love our customers more and our enemies and our neighbors and our families and ourselves, right? That's a big one. I can't love my dogs any more than I do because I love them fully 100%. I want to melt into my dogs and then
I
give
know
it a
that
moment of
feeling.
life.
Yeah.
I've got a belly right here next to me right now that's getting a little rub.
Yeah, my
But
dog's here too.
I love it. But yeah, I mean, that to me is what it all comes right down to. And I think a lot of people whose parents were hippies at least grew up with a certain soap, a peppermint soap in their showers called Dr. Bronner's. And it has
Oh, yeah.
1,001 words on it. Right?
That's
Everybody
true.
knows Dr. Bronner's.
Love everyone.
Right?
The planet is
I,
one. Yeah.
right. We are one. We are all one. As kids, like I used to, even on the toilet, I'd read that every morning. That's my morning reading, and in the shower. And, so I think at the time, I thought it was just, crazy words on a bottle, but I kind of resonated with it. But now as I get older and older, and there's a short story that I highly recommend everyone watch on YouTube or read. It's about a 9-minute animated story that you may be familiar with, but it's called The Egg. Have you heard of The Egg?
No, the egg. I don't think
It's
so.
So I'll give you a quick example. I spend my time between Chicago and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And my last birthday, I was in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And I don't speak a lot of Portuguese, but I speak some Portuguese. But I usually use Google Translate. And we went to the local samba bar, and this very, very famous samba band was playing, and we're having a great time. Everyone wanted to come back to my condo afterwards, and fit about 20, 25 people or so at my condo after a night of dancing and music. And I quite literally had everyone one by one so I could sit with them and watch their reaction, watch The Egg in Portuguese. And without fail, it starts off a little silly and stupid. And you're like, yeah, okay. Within 2 minutes, you're on the edge of your seat. And by the end of this 9-minute video, everyone is in tears. Right. And so I spent like 3 hours just one by one. People were lined up to watch this video with me. And at a certain point, it was a thing. It's like, okay, the birthday boy needs us to watch this video. But effectively, it's a guy, and he wakes up dead, and he's in the nothingness with a spirit. And, that he recounts having died in a violent car accident, and starts asking about his wife and kid. And the spirit's like, well, that's a great thing that you care. And, we could talk about this forever, but it's time for you to reincarnate. So the guy's like, oh, so the Buddhists were right and the Hindus are right. The spirit's like, whatever. He's like, you're about to be a peasant lady in China in the year like 700.
Oh.
Guy's like, wait a minute. In the past, how does that
Mhm.
work? And so, through this short story, it turns out the spirit's like, oh no, you're absolutely everybody. The guy's like, wait, I'm Hitler and I'm, Joan of Arc and all the things. The guy's like, yeah, you're literally everybody. He's like, you're Abraham Lincoln and you're John Wilkes Booth. And like, it's just huge epiphany. And it turns out that, and so then the guy asks the spirit, he's like, wait, are you God? The guy's like, yeah, I'm God. But then he goes on to say, like, yeah, but there's a lot of gods. He's like, I'm just a god. He's like, I'm just here with you because this universe is just an egg, and this revelation of like we're all just you know, and the net is that we as one are going to become a god and transcend this at some point. And I say the video itself and the story is very wonderful and much better than I could do justice for. But then we look at now, fast forward into this day and age of the technology being exponential. And you say, okay, if this is an egg and we have been incubating for a period of time, maybe the egg's going to hatch, right? Maybe whatever, this next birth of the human experience or the experience of experience is going to actually take that next level. And so what does that mean for the human body? I don't know. I do believe that we need an embodiment. I think, even if we are all God, the creator, we created this with our thoughts and one word and sound and vibration and frequency and resonance and all these things. Even if that's the case, we need the body to experience it. Otherwise the experience or the creation doesn't exist. So very long way to say, yes, I agree with you.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to watch the egg now. But yeah, exactly. It's there's the sensation, the sensory experience. What excites me is that we could open that that we could start to do what you just described, like even understand that we're not only the other humans, but also the other creatures, the beings that are around us, and also probably all the ones we don't even know are there and can't sense or see yet. The body can change, and what we can sense can change. For me, that feels really important. And I wanted to ask you about the word love, so I'm glad you already brought it up because this is love and philosophy, and love and technology, right? Like, what is that relationship, love and technology? Because I feel like maybe one reason a lot of people in the technology world gravitate to you is that you talk about that still, and you live that. You're kind of you're still you are very embodied. Whereas I think it can become very cool to not be embodied. Like a lot of us would rather get rid of our bodies because they're difficult, and um, sometimes the cool stuff about AI is this idea that maybe we can just become bodiless. And for me, that's kind of going away from the responsibility we need in the sense of becoming the planet, like embodying the planet, not thinking we can escape into our computer. I don't know. What do you think about that? And like love and technology, and in your experience of it in the worlds that you're in, do you think can sometimes seem dichotomous, or are people really, that's really the root of it?
Well, I think, to go back to the initial question of what does love mean, I think, there are different kind of widely held interpretations. So, one is biblical, and that being love is patient, love is kind. Okay, great. What does that mean? Right. That love is unconditional, and we can study conceptually like agape love, and that this loving of anyone, whether or not they deserve it, or whether or not they're a good person, and just right. But in my opinion, there's always only two things. And so this gets to your question of, is it dichotomous? I believe that there's only two modalities of reality, right? So right now in a binary computing sense, it would be ones and zeros. And that's what's so interesting about quantum computing is there's no ones or zeros. It's just anything in between. It's potentiality. But if we look at uh, on or off, right? Light and dark, love and hate, positive and negative, and, ionic charges, and right. Just everything has one of two states, right? Inertia. Is it moving, or is it not moving? And so I love this analogy of light and dark. And again, when I talk about any two extremes, it's the same thing. So light and dark is love and hate, is live and dead, right? All these things. But so we look at the analogy of light and dark, and I can go into a huge dark space, right? And, fill in the blanks of how big it is, it doesn't matter, right? Completely dark. And I can light a small flame. I can strike a match. I can flick a battery, right? I can turn on my phone screen. That lightness will begin to chase the darkness away. And that one little bit of light can inherently light this entire space, particularly if we give it enough time and if there's enough, to keep this light going. But there's no amount of darkness that can be brought into a well-lit room that has any impact whatsoever on how well lit the room is. The light will just eat the darkness up. And so now we get back to the ones and zeros and the love and hate. And to me, if there's only this moment, and if we're all one, if we were to find a way, and this is kind of what we're doing at Weekday, but if we were able to all just tune into the love, not the hate, the light, not the dark, if we were all able to bring that vibration, frequency, whatever we want to call it, perspective into reality, right? En masse, then I think that there's probably a massive blessing for reality and creation. And I love what you said about Earth as well. I think the Earth is definitely a living, extension of all of this as well. The Earth is the life giver. But I think if we can get to that being the flame and chasing out any darkness and all being on that same page, or, potentially 51% of people being on that same page, but I think there's miracles on the other side of that. And so dichotomous, yes. Intentionality, I think, becomes huge. I don't think we become the light unintentionally or accidentally. But so I know I got a little bit esoteric, but that's how I view the dichotomy.
Yeah, esoteric is fine. I think what I'm trying to do, and I don't know how to do it, and it's one reason I have all these conversations, and as a philosopher, I try to go into all these things in many different ways, is I like what you said, and I agree with it on a kind of metaphorical level in terms of, like, it's very beautiful about the match in the room, and this is a bit powerful, and I don't want to take that power away. At the same time, there's something that bothers me about exactly those categories, the 0, 1. I want to go quantum or spatial or something with even that, so that, for example, like the 0, 1, that's a tool that has helped us a lot. And to think of the world in zeros and ones, but actually, of course, the world's not in zeros and ones, and it's actually never just one side or the other. It's much more complex and nested. Depending on where you are, your 0 or 1's going to be in a different place than mine. So everyone has a different orientation, which means there isn't actually any real opposite. It's just that helps us to awaken or grow or expand or whatever you want to use. In the same way, it helps with the zeros and ones. I mean, all this amazing stuff that's come of our technology. And this is how I think of it. I just get your pushback on it. But I wonder if there's another way to think of it too, where dark isn't the bad and light isn't the good, but because sometimes we need just the darkness too. And sometimes that's the affordance that's best. So, and there's actually never just darkness or just light. There's always a gradation and millions of ways of looking at it. So I don't know. Have you had any way of like digging into that and getting more complex with it? Because I think it relates to the way we see technology too, and even the way technology is structured.
Well, what I would suggest is that there's a very known graphic image to represent what you're saying. And, I've studied most of the different religions and traditions. And so this is one that's, I think, familiar probably in almost ubiquitously, is the yin yang, right? And I know I, as a Westerner, am pronouncing it in the Westerner way, but the circle with, basically half light, half dark, a little dark in the light, a little light in the dark, and right, kind of this almost, sperm-like shape of, chasing itself. And so I think that yin yang really does represent reality. And I think it really does show that, yes, there's the light and the dark, and yes, there's the dark and the light, and yes, they are circular and cyclical. But if we look at ones and zeros, I would almost argue haven't changed humanity, right? Because if we were seeing the binary code, if we were seeing 111 0 0 1 0 1 1, there would be no experience, right? So we're taking ones and zeros as computer scientists or as, as technologists, and we're turning them into something that looks like an avatar or pieces that fit together. And, as far as Tetris, I'm a big Tetris guy, but,
Yeah.
right. So it's not the ones and zeros, although it is, that's the foundation. We can call that the fabric of the digital reality, but it's what those ones and zeros represent and manifest and turn into, and that we can process them as. And that's, I think, the same as the darkness and the light. So in computer science, is the one good or is the zero good? There's no answer. It is,
Yeah,
one's not good,
that's a
one's
good
not
point.
bad. It's put the
Exactly.
two together, right? So the same thing with the darkness and the light. And so we wouldn't have light without darkness, and we couldn't have darkness without light. So I think, and that's why I love quantum everything, quantum physics, quantum biology, I mean, really, quantum world fascinates me to no end, but it is this meshing of the two, right? And ultimately, even quantum computing had to be hard coded in binary, and you use the binary to transcend binary and to no longer need binary. And so I do think that it's like a good recipe in a kitchen. And I do think both are necessary. I don't think it could be one or the other. But if we look back to the concept of like a big bang and a singularity, if there was a huge flash of light in imminent and expansive darkness, and that was the big bang and all life came from it. And if there will be a singularity where all the darkness collapses into the light, and it's just this big, bright, beautiful, love fest, as it were, um, then those would be endpoints, right? And then if time is nonlinear, then they still both exist at once, and everything that happened in between, the millions and billions of years of evolution and life and experience, all just become kind of the output of those ones and zeros, or that lightness and darkness. So I think everything lives in between. I think that's where the dichotomy really is interesting. But if we even look at things like the Oracle of Delphi, where, a very powerful civilization left us their whole manuscript and blueprint of their intelligence, of what every future generation would need to know in order to thrive, right? And to not completely be diminished as well, but was distilled into what is commonly interpreted as know thyself, right? They had
Mhm.
unlimited stone to write unlimited messages. And, this was the thought process of some of the brightest minds on earth at that time, the time exists. And what they decided that everyone needed to know forever and ever and a day is know thyself. So then we come back to, okay, well, why? What does that mean? What are the implications? What are the ramifications? What does it mean if we don't know ourselves? And what does that do for life and experience and all that? So, I say all that just to say, I think being mindful of the fabric of reality, the constraints that we put into our human existence, the feelings that we have towards other human beings on earth that may or may not just be different manifestations of ourselves, becomes hugely important.
It's funny, I was just there last year at the Oracle of Delphi and thinking about this too, and also thinking about self and how that's a word that could change, kind of in the way we've been discussing that what we think of as self can also change, and still to know self might be to know your grandmother, your father, the people around you, the tree. There's there could be a way that just nests in a kind of way that we haven't been able to deal with yet, but maybe our technology helps us. But to link that to something you said earlier about AI, and of course now, I mean, I wish we could talk about the difference between like language and all of this, but with these language models and what's possible now, it's extraordinary. And you said probably we don't have to work anymore, at least not in the traditional ways we have, because so much can be done now from just putting everything we've already done and letting these AI learn on that, and then they sort of can do it for us. So I want to link that to what we've been talking about. Can you imagine a way in which this frees up more time and space and resources for us to know ourselves? Would that, because sometimes I wonder if we're not working, what's going to motivate us? Like if you weren't that little 7-year-old boy who wanted a Rolls Royce, um, and you knew you had to work for it, where would your motivation have come from? Because in a way, that was the motivation to know yourself and go on this journey. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I'm big on universal basic income and unconditional universal basic income and taxing the AI, because the AI will do all the jobs that people had to do for thousands of years. And all the monies generated by those jobs are still going to be generated and going into human beings' bank accounts. And if that's not distributed fairly, unconditionally, and ubiquitously, then I think we see a lot of potential problems. But I've studied 155 universal basic program income programs around the world. Finland just had one that was wildly successful. We're seeing some in India, Brazil, even in Canada and the US. And in the state of Alaska, they've done it for quite some time. And California and some other states have had some very, very interesting data come back from their universal basic income programs. But two of the most interesting data points that are incredibly counterintuitive are people become more productive, not less productive, and mental health issues almost dissipate. To the order of better than 90% of every mental health issue in these populations goes away. There's very little to no more fighting or crime. There's very little to no more depression or even eating disorders. Or it's really remarkable what happens when people are put in a situation when they can do what they want, not what they have to.
Does it
And you
have to
see
do with
people
not
becoming,
comparing? I'm sorry to does that have to do with not comparing yourself and being judged or something? Or what do you think?
to a degree, but I think it more so just comes back to not having to worry, right? I
Mm,
think
the
stress is a
stress and
killer, and
yeah.
right, and not feeling beholden to something, because most people would rather not have to work their entire life just to be able to eat and keep a roof over their head and maybe feed a couple of kids. Um, and so, when I see things like AI right now, right, it's really, really easy to think that AI is the large language models, or, the chat GPTs, the Geminis, the Claudes. And yes, that's a component. But to go back to something I want to put a thread on, you were asking about the large world models. These are based on physics, right? This is learning things like, how do things evolve? How do things respond to gravity? How do different materials work and hold up and intertwine? But we're also seeing what's now called a large nature model that's understanding everything from, how does single cell organisms become, 1 ton herbivores and on Earth, and, how do certain creatures go from being water bound creatures to being earth bound creatures, and then how do they, take flight? We're even seeing things like they found DNA of a woolly mammoth that have been preserved such that they are now regenerating a woolly mammoth. So there may actually be all of these crazy things. They're able to clone animals. They're now in China. They're working with humans impregnating robots and robots impregnating humans. And right, so we will see this humanoid android blend soon. And there's a company that's growing skin cells and putting them on the outside of robots, and we're able to 3D print organs that human bodies don't reject already. And so we're seeing this whole blend, right? And we're seeing potentially what some people are calling transhumanism or human 2.0. And but we look at, so the large language model is a component, just like with us as humans, language has been a component. But then we see that there are different models that are learning how the world works and how, science and the laws of physics and things are applicable. But then we see things like large action models. A handheld device called Rabbit is starting to popularize that. But the action models are learning human behavior and habits and thought processes and understanding, the ways that our brain responds to certain things. So you start to see all of these different models. And once you tie them all together, that's where, it's, I understand someone like Jan LeCun from Meta. He's their chief AI scientist. Some people say he's one of the godfathers of AI. He recently said we're nowhere near AI, but through only one specific lens, because language alone can't be AGI. Okay,
Mm.
but put it with nature and world and action. And so this is where I start to say, if you listen to the subtext, and if you listen to what these people are not saying, they're not saying we don't have AGI, right? They're saying that people's current understanding of AI is not there. And I just think, but all the disparate pieces exist. And when you look at someone like an OpenAI trying to raise $7 trillion, like, what would they need $7 trillion for? It's not just chips and compute power. It is, how do we tie all these together in a way that is productive, that is transformative? And I will say, although I'm very much an optimist, I'm also very, very pragmatic. I believe that the human experience and race and humanity is probably pretty close to an extinction level event if we don't start to mint every single thing that's generated by any AI and any prompt on a blockchain. And blockchain I like because it's trustless, it's immutable, it's a double-blind ledger, it is a store of value, it's a store of ownership, custody. And if we don't know what is real and not real, if we don't have safeguards that make the AI not be able to go rogue, because every AI that's been tested right now, whether it's Alexa or Siri or ChatGPT or Claude or any AI right now, when left to its own devices, will try to figure out how to take out humanity. Every single one of them. Everything Google's done, everything Meta's done, everything Amazon's done, everything IBM's done. You can look at Watson, you can look at DeepMind. It's right. Every AI understands that humanity is the problem and that people are the problem. AI is inherently not on the side of humanity. And if we don't have smart contracts and guardrails in place, we're going to, and if we allow people that are very greedy and maniacal, like the Elon Musks of the world, control all of the data and the power, I don't see, he's trying to put 1 billion robots on Earth to replace humans. So I think we need these safeguards in place. This is something that I've been trying to beat the drum on and scream from the mountaintops for a couple of years now, is we need blockchain for AI, and AI is literally predicated and built on tokens. Tokens can be tied to a blockchain with smart contracts. And then I have zero concern. I think the future is so beautiful and bright for us as long as we do that. So that's been my big initiatives. And that, I think it's that important, to be candid.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, is because I think that's something that I don't hear anyone really saying. And for me, thinking of everything as a path with a trace in the same way as your father that we were talking about, it becomes really important that we are able to know the paths. I mean, that's the only way we can tell what something is or even have an idea of authenticity. That's what I hear you saying. Yeah. So would that be kind of the one message that you wish people would get, is that, because I don't think people even really understand what you mean by that, but it's basically a path. So you know how something got to where it is. You can always trace it in either direction, right?
Precisely. You nailed it 100% accurately. And I was just with the CEO of Siemens globally a few months ago, maybe 2 or so months ago. $160 billion market cap company that's over 100 years old. And they're building an industrial metaverse. And they're using a lot of AI and generative AI. And I asked him, and this is on camera, we did an interview, it can be found widely. I asked him what they were thinking about as far as putting it all on chain. And his face, as I asked that, he said, I don't think we're doing any. Now, he's just one of the global CEOs is in charge of this project. He said, I don't think we're thinking about anything, but it makes a lot of sense. I guess we probably should.
Wow.
100-year-old, $160 billion market cap company who's an industry leader in technology, and they hadn't even thought of blockchain. So yeah, you're right. Nobody's talking
it's
about
the obvious thing that
I
I haven't heard anyone say but you so far. And yeah, it seems like, I guess you are screaming it out for people, but yeah.
It's mission critical. I talk about it in my newsletter all the time. I talk about it in my content all the time. And for whatever reason, I've been given a fair, a fairly sizable platform with, my own followers, company's followers, totally about 50 million. And so if me, I have a obligation with this kind of microphone that I've got at the moment to just keep saying this and, trying to say it in the right circles, and hopefully it resonates. I don't think it's too late. My LinkedIn headline says, P doom equals loading in it. P doom is the probability of doom.
Okay.
And so probability of doom, and, a lot of people, Anderson, Horowitz, and a lot of, others that have really made waves throughout humanity are all talking about this probability of doom as well. And I think half of the optimists are saying probability of doom, no way, the technology is going to save us all. And the other half are going, probability of doom is we're all screwed. Right? And I'm kind of saying, I think we're still writing that narrative. I don't think that we're out over our skis. I don't think that we're at a point of no return. I'm wildly optimistic, but I do believe there's only one solution. I think if we don't get this minted on blockchain or something very similar like that, like a hash graph, but if we don't do this, I I don't see positive outcomes. And maybe it's like Albert Einstein said about World War IV and the weapons that will be used in it. Are you familiar with that story? And
Stones and
right,
rocks or
it
something.
may be
I
like
didn't know about World War
that's
Three.
it. Yep, sticks and stones. And so, um, we may find that if we don't get this right, that we just come back and repeat it. And even man in 1,000 years talks about the humans that used to exist that had handheld devices that could answer any question in the world, and right, maybe we become the thing of mythology. But I do think that there are much smarter people than myself, with much more resources than myself, that I think um, will come around. Put it
And
that
it's
way.
possible. It's absolutely possible. It's just a matter of people realizing it and doing it and starting to think in this other way of traces, always having the trace and looking for it, and that being the way that you can authenticate something. It just needs to become a new habit, I guess, or a new way of thinking. I think that's part of the service you're doing now is trying to explain that and translate that maybe.
Yeah, well, and with WeJ, this is my generative AI company, but we've built mechanisms by which we believe that we'll have access to virtually every speaker in a public place and be able to kind of, get that into public or private spaces and speakers as well. But we believe that the power of music is unlimited. We believe that if we can broadcast the right messages to enough of the billions of people in the spaces where they need to hear it in the exact way where they'll be responsive to it, that we can really effectuate change. And so, that's I spent some time thinking, how do I get my messages out there? It's not just a couple million views a week on LinkedIn, but how do I really speak to humanity in a way that we can all get on the same page and have a commonality and understanding and vision for the future. And that what I identified is that it's music. And so, we're talking to Grammy winners and household names, and they all love what we're doing. And the technology exists. I've built most of it already. So that's my new focus is how do I use music to basically get AI thing.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense because when I think of it as paths, music is the best example of that, of a trace that, I mean, you could really trace music as far back as we can trace anything as a continuous kind of path. And you could almost map like how all the different genres came together or songs or in a very blockchainy kind of way. So maybe that's a perfect way to translate it and get people to understand that other way of thinking that we've been trying to talk about here. But I know now you need to go. So what's the one thing you want everyone to look at right now that you've written or that you're doing right now?
So I don't need anyone to look at anything that I mean, they're welcome to. What I would encourage everyone to do, however, especially those that are resisting it, is to please play with AI. Even if you don't decide to incorporate it in your daily workflow, even if you're just playing with it to know what it's capable of so that you can go back to hating on it. It's the only technology that's ever existed that is its own training manual. All you need to do is ask it how to do what you want to do. And then if it doesn't do what you want it to do, you ask it why, and you ask it what you need to do differently. And AI can do anything that anyone needs it to do right now. Any, and so there's no excuse. I talk to people so often like, yeah, I just don't use it. That's not an excuse. Or even worse, I don't know how to use it. Neither did anybody. When ChatGPT first came out and some of us were playing with it even before it was publicly available, all you do is ask it. Right? Like you don't need to learn it. You don't need to learn anything. All you need to do is just roll up your sleeves and get your hands a little bit dirty. And so I hope everyone, I would imagine anyone that's seen this has probably played with AI, but if not, please do. We all need to be on the same page. We all need to know what's possible. We all need to know what's available. We all need to know what other people are leveraging right now. It's giving them unfair advantages. That would be my takeaway. If people have questions about AI, they can subscribe to my newsletter, AI Logs. It's free. A lot of people say that that's kind of brought them up to speed. But yeah, I mean, if people want to find me, they can find me anywhere. But yeah, if I had one message, please play with AI and just
Yeah. I
see
think
what
that's
it's all about.
thank you for saying that. That's important because that's the way right now is it's just starting. So if we just jump in and get familiarize ourselves with it, almost like just jump in the water. It's a little cold, but then it's wonderful. Um, yeah, that changes a lot, right? The more that people do that. So thanks for bringing that up.
My pleasure. I had this was a great chat. I love your energy and your mind. You are substantially ahead of where a lot of people are. I didn't have much context coming into this other than that you are a philosopher, and I saw the love stuff, and you can tell from my always closing words that love's very important to me as well. But I'd love to chat with you more. I'd love to see how I could potentially be helpful to your circles and your life as well. This is absolutely delightful.
Thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot to me. And I would love to talk to you, maybe get into more depth about the blockchain thing. But I really appreciate you. I really appreciate all the ways you've made and that you're making. So I just want to send you that gratitude for what you're doing and the way you try and do it and your perspective. Thanks, Corey.
That means a lot. Thank you, Andrea.
I hope you have a wonderful day.